This conference will now be recorded.
Excellent. Okay, hello everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And I do know that it's interesting times we're living in, but I also think that this is a really, really crucial time to focus on anything in the world that is hopeful and positive and that is about looking after the most vulnerable and focusing on health and education and all the things that are going to help us to A, get through this current pandemic, and B, possibly prevent future ones. So it does feel really relevant that we're talking about this today. And I hope that as we get through this kind of crisis stage that we can hold on to some of the better things that have come out of this in terms of local community organisation and caring for the most vulnerable people. So anyway, that's just sort of a little bit of background to put us into the context of where we are today. So thank you for joining us, and I really appreciate you giving the time, and all of you have supported the project from the beginning, so thank you for that. So I think all of you know that the Global Goals Centre is an education and visitor centre that we're planning to do in Bristol, which is very much about an immersive, engaging experience so that people can understand what the Sustainable Development Goals are about, but also very much see their own place in helping to bring them about, so that they feel inspired, feel hopeful, feel that they can actually play a part in bringing about this better reality for all of us. So just a reminder of what the goals are. If this button works on my computer, which it is not at the moment. That's annoying. Okay, leave that with me, Mo. Well, you all know what the Sustainable Development Goals are anyway, so that's fine. I will try and fiddle about with that in a moment whilst I'm not talking. So the audience that we're looking at for the centre, and this is probably really relevant to you as teachers, is Key Stage 2 and 3. The reason for that is that we think it's a bit complex to engage very young children with, but it's also those ages that usually go out on school trips and that have a bit more freedom to go beyond the curriculum, because as you're aware, this isn't necessarily, and as though it should be, covered in the curriculum at the moment. But these are the questions that we think a lot of children are asking about, you know, with all the youth strikes and everything else. So it feels very relevant to get those age groups engaged and talking about these things. We may well be able to do offerings for older children if that's requested. That's absolutely possible for us to do. But we're also aware that often they're focusing on needing to get exams, etc. So they won't necessarily be able to come onto these sort of extracurricular things. So that's the thinking behind it. Again, very open to sort of taking people's views on that. But we do want the centre to be open to the general public as well, because it's not just up to children to make a better future. We all need to engage with it. And we do think it's something that will be of interest to a much wider public. So in school holidays and weekends, etc., will be open to anyone. And the other thing that's a fairly new development, which we might not have said about this before, is we've realised that we actually, to make it accessible for a larger number of people, we actually need to have an open space as part of it. So as well as the tour that would be a paid for experience by either schools or individual visitors, we want to have a big sort of open reception area that will have real sort of arty feel, have lots of wow visuals to sort of get people thinking around the goals in a creative and imaginative way, and that would just be an open to everyone kind of space. So you could come in, you could start engaging with the goals, you could start seeing some of the ideas and agencies that you might want to engage with once you leave, and also potentially then be more interested in booking on the tour once you get an idea of the kinds of things that you can experience once you're inside. So in that way, there'll be no charge for any of that, so that all of the city can engage with that part of the centre without paying, and it will be the tour part that will be paid for. So it's the tour really in the scenarios we want to talk to you in a bit more detail about today, and Manu's going to come on to that in a moment. But we basically want the whole experience to be very playful and creative, but also to have a real degree of problem solving and complexity, because not only are the goals themselves pretty complex and engaging, but the fact is how they overlap together. How do you address reducing your carbon emissions when you need to build more homes for people that are homeless, and all these kinds of conflicts that potentially arise in the decision making in how to make a better future and deal with all the goals. So we don't want to skirt around that. We want to look at that head on and be very honest about that. So it could be quite complex and problem solving, but in an imaginative way. So it won't be simplistic in that sense. And the other thing we really want to do is to make sure that in all the different scenarios, we want to provide local and global examples of things that are happening already, really exciting ideas of different ways of doing things, whether it's the sort of community solar project that's happening in Bangladesh, where all the money is kept in the local community to enable more people to get solar panels. And also a lot of those to come from the global south, to take away the idea that we can solve everything in the good old white north, but that actually a lot of the real creative solutions are coming from parts of Africa and Asia, and we can learn from a lot of those things. And the other thing is to provide a really hopeful narrative throughout the whole centre, because so much of our news channels and life, it feels at the moment, is all very negative, and that's what gets reported, and it all feels very disempowering. And so we really want to be able to provide people with hope and inspiration that there is a better way, and there is a huge amount of work already heading towards that. But there are also these problems which we're not going to be able to overcome unless more and more people are engaged at every level of society. And although the scenarios that we're planning are themed, we want climate change and inequality to be the themes that run throughout the whole thing, because they are absolutely key to the whole thing. So I really do need to try and get this slideshow working now. So, look, there we go. There are the Sustainable Development Goals, which I'm sure you're aware of. And it's things, you know, obviously the really, really complex, like zero hunger. How are we going to do that? But, you know, it's not impossible. We just need the right investment, reduce inequalities. These are sort of all really, really key things. Sustainable cities and communities, as well as all the climate ones. So what have we done to date? So we're now a registered charity as Global Goals Centre, which is great, which will help us with our fundraising. We've done quite a number of schools consultations. So we've been to Fairfield, Bristol Free School, Bristol Bristol Cathedral Choir School, Hillcrest Primary, and Barton Hill Academy. And all of those schools are really keen to continue discussions with us, and for the children to be involved in some co-creation further down the line, and some testing of different things. We may have found a venue as of last week, which is very, very exciting. We're just putting together the heads of term with the landlord and discussing all of that, but it's very central, which is fantastic. It's between St Nick's Market and the galleries, so accessible for everyone to get to, public transport, etc. But that's been a major part of our time, is trying to find a venue. We're part of Bristol's One City plan, so everything that the city is doing to work on the Sustainable Development Goals, we're absolutely plugged into that, and we're part of their delivery programme for next year. Last month we held a creative workshop where we had about 50 creatives, educators and subject experts come together, and they helped us to really look in detail at what we're planning and the creative briefs and how realistic they are for people. So that was a really, really positive day, and I think Manu's going to tell you a bit more about that. We now have our first patron, Maya Rose Craig, otherwise known as Bird Girl. You might well have heard of her. Wonderful to have a young person, as it's a youth-focused project. And she's done so much to engage a wider range of people around nature and around looking beyond their own individual lives. So she's a fantastic first patron for us, and she's very excited. This is her first patronage, so that's great. And I've also just put up on the screen a whole load of our partners, because this is very much a partnership project. This isn't something that we as a small charity can deliver. It's absolutely about bringing in all the expertise that there is in the city region, and talking to a huge range of experts and stakeholders to make this happen and make this real. Can everyone still hear me? Because it's gone very squeaky.
Yeah. It is a bit squeaky.
Yeah,
you're fine.
Great, that's fine, thank you, that's all right. So yeah, so this is what we've been working on so far. We've been having lots and lots of conversations, engaging lots of people, trying to make this very much about city priorities, local priorities, young people's priorities. And that's absolutely vital, obviously, in making sure that this is real and relevant. So what's next for us are we're continuing with community consultations. We're doing a big fundraising push. We're not quite sure in the current climate how that's going to go, but we're hoping that because it is, you know, the SDGs are very relevant to kind of getting us to a better place as a world, that actually we you know, it could be an opportunity for us. And we're continuing to do co-creation with a range of different stakeholders, and potentially with now children sitting at home with desperate for things to do, potentially through schools and yourselves, there's something we could do on that as well, which again Manu's going to come on to. So I'm going to hand over to Manu now, because he's just going to take us through a little bit more detail. But before I hand over, did anybody have any questions on what I've said so far? Is the sort of vision and what we're planning to do quite clear to people?
Yeah, seems good.
Great. Thank you. Okay, Manu, I'll hand over to you.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm not expecting anybody to respond, so I'll just plow on.
Just talk into a space. So I forgot this page, which is about Manu, who's now our education lead. We've also got Mark, who's come from the BBC, and he's our creative lead. So he's with the BBC Natural History Unit and is an environmental scientist. So he's a really exciting person to have on board, because he knows all that sort of creative and digi stuff that I don't really understand. And Mike is our fundraising lead. So just so that you know who is actually working on the project as well as me and Manu. And Steve, who you may be able to see in one of your squares, Steve Rosa is our chair of trustees, and he's just retired from the University of Bath. So that's the kind of core team at the moment, and there's other people obviously who are trustees and on our working groups, but that's just to introduce you to sort of some of the key people. Sorry, Manu, back to you.
Great, thank you for the introduction, Jenny. I didn't know what to say about myself and what I do, and thank you everybody for kind of turning up. We're obviously hoping to all be in a room and to all be interactive and responding to each other meaningfully, and but we'll have to make do. And like everybody here, I'm dealing with this new situation on a day-to-day basis, and I think what's kind of come to my mind over the last week or so is that, you know, the world we're going to live in a few weeks from now is, you know, will be different in some way to the world we knew a few weeks ago. And, you know, and I'm hoping that part of that change will be positive movements, I guess, towards a more meaningful education and ways of thinking about ourselves as a community and how we respond to sustainability. And keeping up with the news, I've been interested in how a lot of people are talking about how the current situation we're in is in many ways connected to a lot of the development goals that, you know, that everybody has been talking about over the past couple of years. You know, what is our connection with nature? How do we do trade differently? What is the impact of the way in which we run industry on, you know, on so many things? Is globalization a good thing? You know, and all of those questions. So hopefully a lot of the issues that we have been talking about for the Global Goals Center will be even more relevant, I think. And I think it's good to keep up the momentum of this project and other projects like it, because I think they'll be so much more important. And as Jenny mentioned, we held some creative workshops with people from all over the country about 3 weeks ago, 2nd of March, I think it was, and talked to a lot of people about essentially what could the content of the center be, not only from a scenario standpoint, but from how human beings could be involved in it. And I think to start there, I think one of the main pieces of feedback was that people as much as they wanted, as much as the use of technology and the use of new ways of new media was important, they wanted to see human beings in the center. They wanted to see us being interactive, not only in people pressing buttons and young people playing with things like you would get somewhere like We the Curious, but they wanted to see actual human beings teaching, educating, creating, artists involved in all of that process. And we've tried to be as responsive as we can to what came out of those creative briefs. There was a lot of positive feedback, and I think also a lot of food for thought in terms of the scope of the project and the means with which will be used as a genuine resource for schools, for educators, and how we'll engage with universities and other people who can create content and add to the research that we'll have. But most importantly, how we will be a resource for the young people of Bristol to be able to learn about the global goals, but also be responsive and take action in their lives, and in some way add to what teachers can put on the plate in this arena. Like Jenny said, it's not massively on the curriculum, and I don't think we're trying to respond to the curriculum as such. I don't think that's the main purpose of what we want to do, because the curriculum will change and there are many faults of the curriculum as it is. And so I think we want to make a really bold statement that this should be part of the education of young people, and that the center will be a physical thing that young people can come to and teachers can use as a genuine resource in how they're teaching, and not necessarily connected to the curriculum. And we've streamlined a little bit. We've gone from all the 20-something goals to just 6. We feel like the 6 that we've chosen are a real representation of not only the needs of young people now, but the needs of the community, but also that they're connected to the other development goals in ways that allow for us to teach through those 6 everything else that is in the other goals. And hopefully with working with educators like yourselves and other partners, we'll find where those links are, so that each of the 6 that we're teaching about is not just centered on itself, and that there's a lot of connection that people can see through them. And I'll just go through the 6 that we have gone for. And is Jenny there? Hello, Jenny?
Yes, sorry, I'm trying to move it forward, but
okay, it's fine. It's fine. I'll talk through them. They might not even be in the same order that you've got your slides in. So
okay.
Yeah,
just to confuse me.
Yeah. So the first one that we really want to dig into, not today, but just to kind of signpost you to it being there, is fast fashion. And we feel like it's something that is so present and alive in young people's minds, and it's also something that has a lot of creative potential in terms of how we can represent it using the technology that's available, but also through workshops and connect the young people that are here in what is a relatively privileged city to maybe young people that are working in sweatshops in other parts of the world. And it's also something that's just a part of everybody's life. Everybody wears clothes, everybody desires fashion, and so it's something that we feel will be, is a good launch pad into understanding sustainability on different levels. And there are also a lot of movements around this, a lot of things that people are already talking about, and a lot of groups that are already thinking about fast fashion that we can link up with in the city and globally as well. And I think a big part of it for us is to remove some of the guilt around clothes, and give young people options and ideas about how they can be more sustainable in the purchasing choices that their parents are making, that they're making, that they will make in the future. And I think there's a real scope within this particular sustainable development goal to create empathy within young people for other young people in other parts of the world, but also for people that work in the industry generally. And then the next one that you can click now.
Yay!
Right. Amazing. And then the next one, which is so on top of a lot of people's minds, especially if you live in Bristol, is to do with refugees and migration. I think some of you might have gone to or heard about the migration and climate conference that took place in December, was it?
Yeah.
And yeah, and I think the refugee situation, I'm not going to call it a crisis because it's ongoing, and we've had refugees in this country for forever, really. If you think about Protestant people being persecuted in mainland Europe and coming over to Tudor Britain 500-600 years ago, the refugee situation is something that's dynamic. It's always been there, but I think in connection to the climate crisis and in connection to the issues that people are facing because of the climate crisis around the world, it's a real opportunity to educate young people and their communities about what the actual impact is of some of the ways in which we have lived so far, and how changing those mechanisms and campaigning to politicians and joining groups that are already existing in the city, how we're able to help not only those people who are caught up in the refugee crisis, but that it's also part of who we are. And I think a big part of what came out of the creative briefs is that we want to debunk some of the myths of what a refugee is, and we want to also celebrate in many ways what migration has done for this country and what migration does for multiculturalism, for understanding between different peoples, and there's a lot of scope for partnership with, for example, the schools of sanctuary, and also being able to employ people that are coming from refugee backgrounds to be able to talk about their experiences and to support them to be co-creators in this project and have a dynamic relationship with them, and other groups, of course, such as Bristol Refugee Rights and Bristol Women's Refugees and all of those different groups. So I think often many of the other sustainable development goals that we have put onto the scenarios that we want to look at, I think they all feed into the refugee situation. Whether you're talking about water, food, poverty, education, even the fast fashion scenario that I've just been talking about, they all somehow relate to it. So it's a real opportunity to show those linkages. And like with fast fashion, I think create opportunities for empathy and seeing what young people and their families can actually do within the city. And moving on to the next one, Jenny. I've never had a secretary, Jenny. This feels great. This is really good. Yeah. And I'm not going to go into too much detail about the other ones, because I think originally when we were thinking about the workshops in a room with people interacting in a physical sense, fashion and refugees were top of our list in terms of what people could start to co-create around. So I'll go into a little bit of detail, just tiny bits of detail about the ones that are left on here. So life on land, and this is one that's often coming up in the media because it relates to nature, it relates to what young people care about almost automatically, that sometimes kind of gets lost as we become as we become as we grow up and become older and become disconnected, I guess, from other forms of life. And I think it's a scenario that really has the opportunity to hit the right buttons in what young people are thinking about. It's one that can be really fun, but also really empower the young people to take action, to engage with the wildlife trusts, to engage with the outdoors, to find ways in which they can protect wildlife and human life, I guess, in their own areas and globally, how they can engage with all of those things. And I think visually, it's something that really strikes young people. I think in my own work, I found whenever nature is presented to young people, the way they respond to it is on a totally different emotional level to what adults have the capacity for. And so, yeah, so and like with everything else I've talked about, it's extremely linked to just daily life. Being able to understand it better gives you a better perception of where does our food come from? How do we change the ways in which we farm and all of those things, apart from understanding the importance of things like the Amazon and how humans are connected to nature and the environment. And the next one is life underwater. So there'll be a real linkage between life on land and life underwater. And I think one thing that came out of the creative briefs is that this is a scenario that should be fun. It should be full of mystery. It should be something that really takes the visitor to a different place, while keeping in mind some of the damage that human beings have caused, and at the same time thinking about what can we do as a society, as a civilization, what can we do to kind of reverse some of those damages that we've caused. And also not just life underwater as in the great big oceans, but life underwater in the streams that run through Bristol and the rivers that run through Bristol. And so thinking as widely as we can about it, but I think there's a real opportunity with this one to be extremely, to be extremely entertaining without losing focus on what our responsibility as a society is for protecting life underwater. And so these will hopefully, and there was a good level of feedback around this on how we can link life on land with life underwater and show those linkages. And moving on to...
It's coming.
Trade justice, great. So this, originally we had pitched it as fair trade, and I think fair trade is such a big element of how the Sustainable Development Goals can be met on a trade level, but also on environmental justice level and labor laws and people being paid a fair wage wherever they're working and whatever they're producing. And so we've kind of changed it to trade justice, because I think that's a more all-encompassing phrase, and it really does speak to so many of the other development goals. There's such an opportunity with this to talk about social issues around gender equality and wage equality, and so many of the other issues that are not immediately sustainable development goals in and of themselves, but are really important issues for young people I think for our society to see how the world could work better and how it could be a more sustainable place to live. And there's and I think something that came out of the creative workshops was that it shouldn't be depressing. It shouldn't be just people are suffering because of the way we consume. it should be something that's empowering to the people that visit the center. How do we actually change the ways in which we engage with products, the products we choose to buy, and how can, I guess, the young voice in a house, how can the youth voice help to inspire parents and relatives to make different choices, to make different consumer choices, and what that impacts on the livelihoods of young people and their families in other parts of the world. And we've got one more, I think. And our final one is sustainable city. And I think sustainable city, we kind of pictured it as where people will land when they come into the center, or where people will leave the center from. Because I think it's really important that although a lot of these sustainable development goals feel like global issues, and part of what we're trying to do is make them relevant to everyday life and empower people to think about them in their everyday lives, I think it's extremely important to be explicit that our city is at the center of how we can act. Yeah, and so to look at not only how our city functions now, but where are the opportunities for us to be a sustainable future city, and I think to give a positive outlook to young people for what the future could look like. What are the things that are already out there that could be happening in our city that will make it a cleaner place to live, a more equal place to live, and a fairer society that fits into the globalized picture in a way that that is sustainable ultimately. And but at the same time, we felt it shouldn't be totally focused on Bristol. It should be something that that responds to the fact that a lot of these young people are connected already to cities elsewhere. If you look at the population statistics for Bristol, we find that so many of these young people have family, friends all over the world, and for the most part, they're very likely to end up living somewhere else. And so it's looking at what a future city looks like just generally, but also what that means in a Bristol context, and hopefully empowering them to push for different types of change within the city, and giving teachers the resources to engage the young people in what can be done in the immediate term and what we can be campaigning for in the long term, whether that is pushing for greener buildings, pushing for schools to use different types of energy and all of that sort of stuff. But really, I think it's as a place that people will come into and leave out of. I think the sustainable city scenario is something that has the opportunity to really empower people and should be a positive experience, I think. Not something that's looking back at where we've messed up, but how we can change things. Does anybody have?
Can I just interject there, Manu, just for one more thing? So
yeah.
everything Manu said about the sort of sustainability, onboarding, and final situation. There's also we're very aware that we need there to be an overriding narrative, so that there's a proper journey that happens through the different scenarios, rather than it just being, oh, now we're talking about refugees, or now we're talking about fast fashion. So it might be that there's like a number of problem-solving things that happen at each stage, and you collect different information from each scenario to sort of help inform a problem-solving thing at the end. But there has to be a narrative that weaves all the way through, so that everyone can understand how it all feeds into a whole, so it's not too disparate, and grounding it where people are and their own personal experience in their own community is absolutely essential to being part of that narrative journey as they go through the centre. So it isn't just something that's over there, but it's something that is about us here and our own place and our own families and our own communities being more equal and greener as well. So that's all part of that really crucial journey that we want to take people on.
And I think to add to what Jenny's saying, I think from the last workshops that we did and conversations we've had before and since, I think we really want it to be an experience that you couldn't get anywhere else in Bristol, to be something that's really unique and something that has a clear outcome as well, so that people, teachers bringing young people to the centre and members of the general public come out feeling like they have been educated, to some level also entertained, I think is part of it, but also that there is an element of behavior change within it. Have we inspired them to think differently and to look differently at how they can be involved with the Sustainable Development Goals and how they're relevant to their lives? And the idea that Jenny has spoken about of maybe having problem solving woven through it. I think this is where the being able to speak to people like yourselves and other educators, I think this is kind of where we're at in wanting to co-create what the educational outcomes will be, and how to approach, and how to approach the scenarios from a viewpoint where it's not only informative but interactive. What is working out there that you have seen? How can we include it into the centre? What new ways of thinking can we be looking at in educating people that come to the centre? And like I said at the beginning, we're not too obsessed with it being a curriculum fit. A lot of these things should be on the curriculum but are not, and so in some ways it becomes almost a statement that why is this stuff not happening in the classroom? Why is this stuff not happening in our education already? And also, as the curriculum changes and itself becomes responsive to the Sustainable Development Goals, we want it to be a dynamic space where teachers can contribute and say, you know what, this is something we're already covering, and this is something we're not covering. How can we include that? And yeah, I think that's kind of my bit. I think as we move more into community engagement, whenever the current situation starts to lift and we start to think of how we can engage the community, I think there'll be a lot of linkages between how educators can co-create with us, as well as the needs of the community in Bristol. And Jenny, did you want to kind of move on to how we co-create, or should I speak to that?
Yeah, it'd be good to sort of pause. Obviously, we're very aware that we were planning a much more interactive session and we're just kind of talking at you because of being online, but it'd be great to just get any feedback at this stage before we go on to other stuff. So just initial responses to anything we've said, and also, any feedback that you want to give about the ideas that we've presented to you. It'd be great to hear. Eleanor, do type if you have anything.
So, sorry, Jenny, from a primary perspective, I think I'm really comfortable and a lot more comfortable with the selection of 6, because I think schools really struggle with trying to get their head around all of them.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really, really real lovely positive, is that, and I also think that the ones you've chosen, fabulous, links. Whilst yes, you don't want to connect with the curriculum entirely, but having those strong, the thing that obviously binds the school together. They are, in particular in primary, we're always up against time as being such a so tight, I guess, only one way of describing it. Where we can make those really relevant and important links, we should be doing, whether that's through geography, which all of those do, whether that's through science, which all of those do. I think it's fabulous. So I don't see any problem with schools. Firstly, a number of schools I work with already engaging with these, but also secondly, looking at some co-creation. I think, yeah, absolutely brilliant.
Great, thank you for that. And yeah, we should say that we will be pointing out curriculum links where they are there, because we don't want to just avoid it altogether, because obviously we know that schools have got to tick those boxes. So we'll absolutely be making those links, but we are recognising that some of this stuff is definitely beyond curriculum, and we're kind of proud about that. And everyone sort of said to us, yeah, that's okay, because we actually want to teach it and we don't know how to. So yeah, thank you.
I like the way beyond. I really like that concept of beyond curriculum, and I think what we've been doing a lot of work on is that hidden curriculum, which is that beyond curriculum. So it's not the curriculum as in what the national curriculum says, it's that wider perspective. So really love that. Yeah. Great,
thank you. And Eleanor's been typing to say that she agrees as well and is excited by what we're proposing. So that's lovely.
I think part of the sorry, Julian, go ahead.
Thanks. I was just wondering whether I'm not directly linked with the Bristol Futures programme, which is part of the University of Bristol, which undergraduates have been very involved in developing content that is sort of designed to go cross-curricular, interdisciplinary within the UG kind of sphere, and is a space, I suppose, for co-creation at an undergraduate and I think postgraduate level. And I don't know, but I'm because I'm not directly plugged in with that at the moment, but I wonder whether you had any contact with Bristol Futures at the university?
I think we have via Alan MacLeod, who's leading on the SDGs at the City Office and is also part of Bristol University. So he's kind of our link person with that programme, I think. So yeah, thank you. That is definitely the way to go. And the more that we can bring in those kinds of things and make it relevant to as many different city initiatives as possible, then obviously that's going to be a real strength of it.
The other thing that occurs to me, which is something that I could explore a little more, is I think I've spoken about this before, but that we have a Green Apple initiative. The Green Apple is a name of a project that's been running at Bristol University with the PGCE programme and network schools for about 4 years or so. So each year, PGCE students can choose to be involved in this initiative. And the idea is it's a space for, again, cross-curricular initiatives to reimagine curriculum implementation, really. So to get beyond Key Stage 3, Key Stage 4 written curriculum to think about reimagining it outside of subject silos. And I'm just wondering whether that's a possibility for making a bridge possibly with Key Stage 3 contexts. I'm thinking if we have schools where we've got PGCE teachers on placement across 3 or 4 different subject areas, whether if they could make a sort of a cohesive unit to build a bridge cross-curricular, because that is quite a challenge, as I'm sure you've encountered at Key Stage 3 and beyond. It's about opening up the spaces in school which work outside of subject silos, to use that word.
I think there's definitely, that's a really good point to make, you know? And I think there's definitely the opportunity to, a lot of the stuff is cross-curricular, you know, and when I say we don't want to obsess with the curriculum itself, I think going beyond the curriculum, like Jenny said, is important. And so I think you make a really good point, Julian, that there is a massive opportunity to use the content of the Sustainable Development Goals to create content that goes cross-curricular, that can be used by PGCE graduate, new teachers, and I think working from the bottom up really is, as in people coming into the teaching profession already having their teaching hats on about how do I teach the global goals, and how do I make it something that, you know, is meeting all those tick boxes that that teachers have to meet nowadays, but also in a way that's, you know, in a way that's easy, you know, in a way that doesn't kind of add to their workload, that's actually responsive to what they're trying to do. I think you make a really good point there. I don't know if have we come across Green Apple before, Jenny?
No, I've not heard of that before. So that would be really good if we can link up with that. Thanks, Julian.
Would you be able to link us up to them?
Yeah,
Julian?
Absolutely.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
So, can I ask? At Key Stage 3, I mean, is there a development towards any cross-curricular work, or do they, once they're in secondary school, are they really kind of stuck into the subjects, or is there some way that schools can evolve across the curriculum as opposed to the silo subjects in the early years?
I think, Steve, your comment there about what schools can do is really pertinent, because my sense is it depends a lot on the individual schools. So I think some schools may be revisiting this at a school level with the current Ofsted school inspection framework, which is asking for expressions of curriculum intent and curriculum implementation, curriculum impact. That's the model that Ofsted is now saying that they will enact during school inspections whenever they restart. So at a school level, there may have been some reimagining of curriculum intent, but I think what I tend to see anyway is that it's where schools have one or two individual teachers who carry with them a passion to make something happen, that something happens. Otherwise, I do feel that it tends to be still, we're seeing very much, it tends to be trapped, contained along subject content lines. So it might be that an individual teacher in, say, science or geography is picking up on some of these issues. It is entirely possible that within school contexts, even there, it's not getting joined up.
Yeah, okay, thanks. It's useful.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to what Julian is saying, because I've you know, I was at City Academy a couple of weeks ago and talking about the difficulty that the deputy head there, Aisha Thomas, that she's got in trying to bring gender education into what's going on, and racial equality education into what's going on in the curriculum, and where does it fit. And a lot of the times I think teachers are looking for ways of implementing things that have social value, environmental value. They want to bring them in, but it's finding the time, I think, to do it properly, to make it work. And I think part of the potential of the Global Goal Center is seeing where those linkages are really, and making it easy for teachers to then take home or take back to their schools a different way of teaching in some respects. I think there's a real potential for that. But it's extremely difficult, and as Julian says, it's on a school by school basis. It's who's on, yeah, yeah, who's able to do it.
Yeah, sure.
I'm really aware of time, so could I just ask you, Melly, to kind of take you through the next stage and how the process is going to continue? Would that be all right?
Yeah, great. So we originally wanted to obviously have everybody around and do some co-creation about what the scenarios might look like, and to ask a few questions to do with the design, because we feel like if teachers and educators are involved in the design, then that really has a powerful impact on how the creatives look at it. And some of our key questions were, you know, how will it look and feel? What are 3 things that are important to you, and what should or should not be included in the center? So I think the given that we are now in this situation where we're going to be having to work remotely, we are keen to send out some of these questions in a questionnaire format that yourselves and hopefully other teachers can feed back to us over the coming weeks, and then that can feed into the next part of the process for us. We really want to kind of use this time to, you know, which is downtime for a lot of people, but you know, but will be work time for us to, you know, to create a vision that links up what we got from the creatives with what teachers are actually saying could work and should be included. So Jenny's got my email up on there, and you'll be able to feedback not only on this session but also through the questionnaires that Jenny sends out on, you know, on what can be done. I think I don't know if there are any people that are teaching in a school at the present moment. Eleanor is. I think the other part is we want to carry on the co-creation element with young people. So not only with the schools that we've spoken to so far, but find creative ways in which maybe we can pass on links and interactive stuff that's already on the internet, and be able to pass it on to young people who'll be mostly sitting at home over the next few weeks, and also get their feedback. And we want to explore ways in which we can co-create with them. But I think the first stage is really sending out a bunch of questions to you guys about what you think will work, what should the center be in terms of an educational journey from your standpoint, and then feeding that into how we move forward.
Well, is everyone happy that I send them out the questionnaire? Obviously, do share it with any colleagues as well. You know, there might be people that were interested in joining, other teacher friends that you've got or whatever. We'd absolutely love to have as many people as possible. And I will be posting this video on YouTube so people can watch it and get the whole context of what the centre's about before they fill in the questionnaire. I'm aware that at the moment you're probably just frantically making resources for children to work on at home, but it might be that they come at a quieter time once that's immediately been done. So thank you, Eleanor, for that. So yes, that would be absolutely great if we can continue the conversation offline.
Well, thank you, everybody. That very wonderful presentation, Manu. Thanks very much for that. Great. I hope this proves useful to everybody. Thanks, Jenny.
Thanks ever so much. It's been so good to have you all here, and I'm sorry it's been a little bit one-dimensional. Would have loved to get a lot more input from you, but hopefully this is just the start of something rather than the end results. And we're definitely open for more conversations on a one-to-one basis and visits, etc. once we're able to have social contact again. Anything else you want to say, Manu, before we close the meeting?
Just to say thank you for taking the time. You know, you could all be out there panic buying chickpeas,
toilet rolls.
but yeah, so you know, and like Jenny says, this is really the start of a journey as this becomes, you know, more of a, you know, with the venue now being almost confirmed, hopefully soon, and all of that, you know, there will be so much more need for your input, and I imagine a lot of educators will, a lot more educators will be involved in how this, you know, in how this forms. So yeah, this is just the start of this journey, really, and thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks so much, everybody. Wish you the best in all the current climate that we're facing, and we'll be in touch with the questionnaire very soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.